Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Liam's Hockey. Yeah, it's been a few days, hasn't it? Been a couple of days since I came on here and talked a little anecdotal factoids and trivia and statistics and things of that nature from the National Hockey League. So I'm actually going to backdate this one a couple of days because I did miss, well, for me personally, one of the most significant dates on the calendar year in terms of a memory. And it does involve a pretty significant moment in NHL history. It was the night Jean Beliveau scored his only overtime goal. And that was April 24th, 3 days ago, being the anniversary of that. So kind of scooting over that one and bringing it here to you on the 27th. That's something I got to do because that's the first game I ever watched in its entirety in my life from start to finish. I was 9 years old, just a few weeks before my 10th birthday. Growing up not far from where I am right now in the village of Osgood, I was on the Cars Road, just a few miles that way. Downstairs in what was then our TV room, later became my bedroom, but it was the TV room at that time. We had the black and white set on the floor, great big contraption that it was, and watching, of course, Hockey Night in Canada. It was a Thursday night. I was in grade 4, a student at St. Leonard's Elementary in the village of Manotick. And Montreal was playing Boston in Game 6 of the semifinals with the Habs up 3-2. Boston scored in the first period. I believe it was Ron Murphy, I think. And Sergevard tied it in the second with an assist from Jean Beliveau. And there was no scoring in the third period. And it was already pushing the envelope a little bit. I mean, the game started at 8 o'clock in those days. There wasn't the TV timeouts and the intermissions weren't as long, but still. It was past my bedtime when I pleaded with Dad, especially when it went into overtime, to let me stay up. It was probably, I'd say, around 10:30, 10:40 at night. And we had to go through the intermission and then went into the overtime, and there was no goal. There was no goal in the first overtime period. And so you can imagine the hard case I became at that point to want to stay up. And April 24th, 1969. It's incredible when you think about it. It's 51 years ago on Friday, just past the anniversary. And then in the, I believe it was the 11:28 mark, or somewhere around there, just after the 11-minute mark, Jean Beliveau scored against Jerry Cheevers to win the series. Claude Provost drew the assist. I'll always remember what I remember anyway, and I haven't seen this goal in a long time, so it probably didn't happen quite this way maybe. Just in my mind it did. But I remember after Beliveau scored, at least at the time anyway, on live TV, John Ferguson shooting the puck in the net as well. Like, the goal had been scored, but I just remember Fergie going by. I perhaps might be confusing it with another moment, but it was a significant moment in time. As I said, I was in grade 4. I fell asleep in class the next day. Our teacher was Mrs. McCaskill. She had taken over for Mrs. Laughlin, I believe, was her name initially, who had left on maternity leave. And Mrs. McCaskill had come in much earlier in the year. This was, of course, late in the school year, late April of 69, grade 4. And I fell asleep in class, and she had to come up. I used to sit right at the back of the class beside a guy named Rock Villeneuve, one of my best friends at that time. And she shook me to wake me up, and I jumped up and yelled, "He scores." Anyway, one of those moments. April 24th, 69, Jean Belivau's only overtime goal. So, thought I'd mention that. Fast forwarding there to the 3 days to get you up to speed here on April the 27th. Oh, by the way, one other significant thing on the 24th needs to be mentioned. Because the original 6 era it pertains to a 25-year period in the NHL from 1942 to 1967. So the last man to play in the NHL who played in the original 6 era was Wayne Cashman of the Boston Bruins. And he did so on the 24th of April in 1983 when the Bruins beat the Sabres in overtime in Game 7, I believe on a Brad Park goal, early in OT, about $1.52 in or something. Then Cashman played that game. It was his 8th and final playoff game that year. He did not play in the series against the Islanders, which they lost, I believe, in 6 games. The Islanders going on to win the Stanley Cup. Montreal in 69 going on to win the Stanley Cup, sweeping St. Louis. The Islanders didn't sweep the Bruins, beat them in 6. But Cashman was the last man who played in the original 6 era to play in the NHL. Now, going into that season, Carol Vadnais and Serge Savard were also with him, but neither of them, for different reasons, went as far into the year, that season, as Wayne Cashman did in 1983. So there you go. I had to get that out on April 24th, even though I technically missed it. On the 27th here, and I'm really going to go down the rabbit hole, but Toronto and Detroit had a hell of a playoff series in 1993, as most of you know, ending again in overtime on a Nikolai Borchevsky goal, if I'm saying his last name right, or probably not. But great series. And the Leafs had a great run that year, as most of you know. This was the anniversary of Game 5, where another overtime goal was scored by Toronto, scored by Mike Foligno of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Mike's got a couple boys in the NHL, as most know, Nick and Marcus. But Mike Foligno, I only met him one time. He wouldn't know me, but I know his son Nick a little bit when he was here in Ottawa. Did a couple gigs together before he was traded away. But I remember that Mike Foligno, so he was a draft choice of the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL. Sudbury boy. And the Detroit Red Wings in 79-80 left their old Detroit Olympia behind and moved into what was then the brand new Joe Louis Arena. Imagine. We're only talking 1979. It's really not that long ago. It's only 41 years. So the last game played in the Olympia was December 15th, 1979, and the Red Wings played the Quebec Nordiques. And the last fight ever, you got to think of the guys who played there, right, in the Olympia. Your Howie Youngs, your Gordie Howes, and, your Ted Lindsay's. You're talking some legends of the game, right, of the Detroit history. There's Stanley Cups that they won in the 30s and the 50s, and some of the great teams and great players. Last fight ever in the Detroit Olympia, Mike Foligno was in it with a member of the Quebec Nordiques named Blair Stewart was his name. It was in the second period, I believe. And the last goal ever was Greg Jolly. Anyway, then 2 weeks later, give or take, I think around the 27th, 28th, they opened the Joe Louis Arena, and Mike Foligno assists the first ever Red Wing goal in the Joe Louis Arena. Like I said, go down the rabbit hole a little bit on this one based on the fact that Mike scored on this anniversary in 1993 in Game 5 for the Leafs on a series that they would go on to ultimately win before losing to the Los Angeles Kings. And yeah, there's no question. Had Toronto played Montreal in the finals, I think it would have been a great series, but I just don't think anybody was taking Patrick Roy on a best-of-7 in 1993. I think he pretty much proved that with 96 minutes of shutout hockey and OT or thereabouts. Something pretty crazy. It was all that and then some. Something else on this day, more of a factoid type thing. Last year we had that massive controversy, which now has brought in a new rule in the NHL that they're going to review the majors in the playoffs because of the Cody Eakin major against for the San Jose Sharks Las Vegas Game 7 when he got the 5 and the 10, and the Sharks went on to score 4 power play goals on the 5-minute major in 4 minutes and 1 second. And somehow in all of that hoopla got lost in translation that on this date in 1998, the St. Louis Blues scored 4 goals on the same 5-minute power play in 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Almost a full minute less than the San Jose explosion. And the goal scorers were Pascal Rheaume, this is Manon Rhéaume's brother, Brett Hull, arguably, you could make the case, the greatest goal scorer of all time. I've got him ranked number 3, more or less, in with his dad, in behind Ovi and Bossy. Pierre Turgeon, and there's lots about Pierre that you've got with him and his brother Sylvain, the first overall pick, and he didn't fight in Piastani, whatever, on and on, 100-point seasons. And Terry Yake was the last St. Louis Blue to score on that 5-minute major. They were playing the Los Angeles Kings. What happened was there was an altercation with Sean O'Donnell of the Los Angeles Kings. And the reason I like this stat is because I know Sean a little bit, and his father Emmett. I met them years ago, and Sean ultimately ended up winning a Stanley Cup later on. But with LA that night, he got into it with Jeff Courtnall. And Jeff Courtnall won a Stanley Cup in the NHL, and him and his brother Russ, who have both had distinguished careers, were the first brother combination in NHL history where both brothers played 1,000+ games. Anyways, this night, Courtnall charges into O'Donnell, doesn't fight. O'Donnell drops the gloves, feeds him, gets 5 and 10, and St. Louis scores 4 power play goals in 3:06, which I think is the record, I believe. Anyway, it's about a minute faster than Vegas. So there you have it. A couple of factoids for you on the 27th. And had to get in April 24th. And we're going to do a toast for a guy who's no longer with us. And I never actually met him, but his name is just kind of synonymous. Let me just pour myself a real good shot of whiskey here. I know Uni's always checking. Almost out, folks. Almost time for a backup bottle. Yeah. Liking the shirt tonight, too. Tragically hip. Got the representing the hip. Might play a little Wheat Kings later. My favorite hip tune, followed by Bob Cajun. So, today would have been Keith Magnuson's 72nd birthday, if he was still alive, and he no longer is. We lost him, my God, it's over 16 years ago. It's 16 and a half years ago or so. Terrible accident. Won't get into that. Bottom line is, he's no longer with us. And for anybody who remembers Keith as a player, number 3 in the Chicago Blackhawks, I mean, between him and Terry Harper, I don't know who gave up more blood in a fight. But my God, that man played with heart. And they went to a couple of finals, and he was part of that starting rotation on D, in that top 4, 3, 4, 5 range for years on Chicago. And just an absolute warrior. And by all accounts, to everybody that I've ever talked to, a prince of a man. And were he still alive, he'd be 72 today. And I thought that was appropriate enough for me to wish the late Keith Magnuson a happy birthday here with an Irish toast. And God willing, resting in peace still. And condolences even all these years later to anybody who did know him or meet him or his family, by all means. So that's it for this day in hockey. Thanks for checking it out. G'day.